Okay, so I have absolutely no idea what happened, but somehow Zoom closed itself out without like instruction to. So, and once it completely shuts down, there's not a way for me to like continue the lecture from like where I was. And no offense, love you guys, but I'm not going to go back and talk and do the first 30 minutes again. So this is chapter 6, public opinion lecture part 2. Hopefully it'll just be in 2 parts. Hopefully this doesn't happen again. So I'll have both like parts 1 and 2 posted for you guys, both in Canvas and on the YouTube channel. So hopefully that was like a one and done. I've never had it happen before, so I don't know what in creation went wrong, but it was very frustrating. So, and I had to wait to see what it was going to do before I like started again. So, okay, let me go back to where we were. Share the screen with you guys. All right, so we were, is that where we were? Yes. Okay, so we were talking about liberals and conservatives. And so it died on me in the middle of the conservative portion. So anyways, we talked about all the domestic issues. And then as far as foreign affairs, conservatives are supportive of a stronger military base to present ourselves in a powerful manner if we need to, with other entities around the world. And the conservatives are supportive of us with military interventions. So if like there's a skirmish, something, needs to happen, like Iraq, for example, like they were supportive of doing that more than like liberals were supportive of. I mean, in the beginning, most everyone who was around for 9/11 was supportive of some kind of action, but the longer it went on, the less support it garnered. So liberals are not as much for international military force, conservatives are. So that's kind of the difference there. So other types of political ideologies that your book talks about. The first one is libertarian, which I discussed a little bit earlier. So the definition for that is someone who emphasizes freedom and believes in voluntary association with small government. So they are more so even than like conservatives as far as like not wanting a large government. They want the government to be involved as little as possible in all of the citizens' day-to-day lives. And that includes like our economy and our society. Like they really want like a bare bones government, which is like further right really than like conservatives want. And then another term that a lot of people talk about are socialists. So I'm sure you have heard that term. And that's someone who generally believes in social ownership, strong government, free markets, and a reduction in economic inequality. So they argue that more government is necessary to be able to manage these things and to be able to promote proper justice, as opposed to leaving it up to the people, where sometimes that becomes a free-for-all if there's not some kind of order, right? So they're more to the left than a lot of like liberals are, right? So like libertarians further to the right than a lot of conservatives, socialists further to the left than a lot of liberals. And some people use the terms interchangeably and maybe kind of see themselves in kind of like a crossover, like they, like liberals might be supportive of like some of what socialists are supportive of, and but not other things, and vice versa. So figure 6.2, which is on page 155, shows in general how the country has registered to vote and tends to focus their ideology. So at the beginning of the 90s, moderates and conservatives were at the higher rate. Like if you go back and like look at a lot, like some of like Bill Clinton's stuff, right? He was a Democrat, but not really as far left, like more of a moderate. And a lot of people at that time considered themselves to be more moderate. You ask most people and they'll say, I'm somewhere in the middle. But if you start nitpicking different issues, you'll find that that might not be as true, right? Like as the political divide has gotten to be more pronounced and more defined on certain issues, people have moved away from that moderate middle level to either liberal or conservative. And so there has been a slight decline in conservatives, not big, I mean, like just a little, like on a national scale. And then we've had like an increase in liberal registration and ideology. And some of that is younger people starting to register to vote and partaking in the process more, and they tend to be more liberal than a lot of older people. So that's some of that divide. Some of the older people who were on the scales earlier aren't around now. So like, you know, some of that shift, obviously, like, you know, there are still people who aren't necessarily older who are conservative, and there are liberal people who are older too. So those are generalizations, but not, you know, indicative of every single person of a particular age range or, you know, of a particular ideology either. It's just me. So this says, while slightly more Americans identify themselves as conservative than liberal, the majority identify themselves as independent. And a lot of people will just pick a political party to be part of like the primary process, or because they feel like they need to choose one or the other. But a lot of people do more consider themselves kind of independent. During the period shown in this figure, however, Americans have had Democratic and Republican presidents. What might account for this apparent discrepancy? What role do moderates play in the electorate, and how stable is Americans' ideology over time? So a lot of different things go into that, and we'll talk about that more when we talk about elections. But to kind of address this particular question, we tend to have political realignments every 30 years or so, which we had talked about in one of the other chapters. I believe we've already talked about that a little bit. And so every, you know, couple of decades, we sort of shift. We say, okay, well, these people have had an opportunity to do something and they haven't. So now we'll give power to the other. Also, in times of war, we are less likely to change leadership. We'd rather dance with the devil you know than the one that you don't, right? Like dance with the one who brung you type thing. People are concerned in a large time of crisis to change leadership in concern of like making something worse when it comes to, you know, if we've got a lot of troops overseas for something. So we are more likely to stick with, you know, like FDR, for example, like he served 3 terms during World War II. Bush got reelected after 9/11. And a lot of people think maybe he wouldn't have had we not been in the middle of what we were in the middle of, and et cetera, et cetera. But we will talk about that in more detail when we get to that section of the book. So, all right. So like I mentioned before, there are several different things that form your individual political opinion. Sorry, I keep saying political, I mean public, but same difference, right? Like, because we're talking about politics and government, right? So, so on page 156 is where we are in the book for how we form political and public opinions, which also means we're on the second chapter goal, which is describe the major forces that shape public opinion. So we've answered the first chapter goal question, which was describe Americans' core political values and ideologies, which we just did: liberal, conservative, libertarian, socialist, et cetera, et cetera. So there are two things that your book starts to discuss initially. The first one is political socialization, which is the induction of individuals into political culture, learning the underlying beliefs and values on which the political system is based. So that has to do with learning about politics and government, learning how our society generally feels like about liberty, democracy, equality of opportunity, and then kind of like moving forward from there. So let's see. People's attitudes about political issues and elected officials tend to be shaped by their underlying beliefs and values. Someone who dislikes government regulation of the economy would probably be predisposed to oppose the development of new healthcare programs. Similarly, someone who values environmental protection is likely to support the creation of a new national park, a ban on fracking, or tighter regulations on auto emissions. The process through which these underlying political beliefs and values are formed are called political socialization. And then there are different agents of socialization that you sort of put together to help form your public opinion. So agents of socialization are social institutions, including families and schools, that help to shape individuals' basic political beliefs and values. So, oh, goodness gracious. So let's see, membership in social groups is another one: religion, party affiliation, economic factors like income, political environment, like the media, that kind of thing. Different political events such as 9/11, like that can also shape how you feel about certain things. So now we're going to talk about the different agents of socialization that can impact your public opinion and therefore your values and beliefs, which all lead to whether or not you tend to be more liberal, more conservative, libertarian, socialist, et cetera, et cetera. So first thing that we're going to talk about is family. So, you know, a lot of times adults don't realize what they're talking about around their kids. And, you know, when election time comes up and the parents are talking about candidates, they're watching the news, they maybe watched a debate and then they're talking about it. Maybe they're debating, maybe like I remember as a kid, like my mom and dad would talk about those issues. And if they disagreed, my dad would say, well, you shouldn't go to the polls because your vote's going to cancel out mine because we don't agree. And my mom was like, yeah, that's not how that works, because it's just like winner takes all, whoever has the most votes, right? So like I'm vote for my guy, you vote for your guy or gal, right? And then everybody else does the same thing, and whoever has the most votes wins. But like he would try and convince her that she should go. He could be a sore loser. So he would kind of be like that about certain issues. And so I always remember him saying that, you know, like if they disagreed on something, and, you know, like parents, it's hard when you have kids hear everything. Even if you think they're in bed or you think that they're playing and not paying any attention. You know, parents might talk about the economy. They might talk about their income status, like, you know, how hard things are or how, you know, well they're doing or whatever the situation is, right? And then kids kind of hear that, and then they hear the opinions that go along with it. Like, well, if so-and-so would do this, like the economy would be better, or if they would just do this, or if they blah, 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 right? And so then children sort of absorb those political views without consciously being aware of it. So it's really common for children to be of the same political persuasion as their parents or whoever like their primary caregiver or caregivers were. Like my parents were both of the same political party. And I ended up being of that same political party. My brother ended up being a different political party, which is interesting. We try not to talk politics because we don't like agree on anything really when it comes to that. And some of that is his own personal experiences, things that he's experienced in his time in the military, his experience as like a young father. He had his first child when he was a teenager. She was a surprise, and she was born at the beginning of May. He graduated mid-May, had his first Father's Day, and then turned 18. Like all in like May and June. So like he was a high school graduate and a father and had his first Father's Day all before he turned 18. So his experiences are obviously different than mine. Like I was 36 before I had my first child, and I didn't go into the military. I went to college. And so we had very vastly different experiences. We both handled my father's death like very differently because we had very different relationships when he was alive with him, right? Than like I had different than he had. And so all of those things and how we each viewed our experiences, even though we had the same parents, we grew up in the exact same house, we had a lot of shared experiences, we diverged vastly as adults because after we were not under the same roof, our experiences shifted. And I was the oldest. It was just the two of us. I was older than he was. And so that also matters because I experienced things in a way that he didn't because I was the older one. I remember a lot of things that he doesn't remember from when we were growing up. And that's just an example of like what a lot of people experience in their lives. And then they end up being like completely opposite ends of the spectrum from each other. And so that can happen as well in the same household. So they can absorb the political views of their parents. But then as they become adults, like things might shift. And my brother's always been really good about like tuning out stuff. Like I absorb everything around me, and he can get in his own world and not necessarily notice as much. And so then isn't impacted in the same way that I might be impacted by something. So, and that also, of course, can happen with children as well. If they can kind of live in their own world and they're oblivious to what's happening around them, then, the family thing might not impact them as much. But really observing kids do, right? And so then they're very, very aware of, what their parents and their grandparents and, conversations that are happening at the dinner table after the kids have gone off to play, and, all of those kinds of things can impact that. So the next thing that the slideshow mentions is social networks. Your book talks about education next, and we'll talk about that in just a minute, but I'll follow along in the order of the slides. So, you hear social network, you think like social media, but, and that is part of it. And then the other part is like actual face-to-face interaction, which of course with the pandemic for the last couple of years and COVID, just kind of shutting everything down, and for us with the hurricane, and now the economy, so everybody's poor and nobody can go out anywhere. We haven't had a lot of face-to-face social interaction, right? So our social skills might be a little rusty, but in general, right? Like when you hear social networks, like that's your friends of your age, your fellow classmates that you spend a lot of time with, that sort of opinions can be shaped by our like handpicked them. So there's usually a reason for that, right? Like you guys get along certain, you certain about in your life, and so their opinions are going to matter. Different issues, and then social. Something. Then, sorry. So anyway, whatever talk to, and shish kebab. Hold on. You're like, no, it wasn't. It was pushed.